The 16,000-seat megachurch near downtown Houston, once the Houston Rockets basketball arena, now owned by the celebrity televangelists. His sermons followed by 7 million people.
God's got this.
When Harvey slammed into Texas, Pastor Joel initially offered prayers, but little else, and social media pounced. His critics demanding more. "Open your church as a shelter," one person wrote. "Provide food and clothing, please." A fellow pastor tweeting, "You have a huge obligation to show the love of Christ at this very moment. Open the doors."
It's times like this I wish I were a religious man.
It's all over, people. We don't have a prayer.
Hello and welcome to the Serfs. I'm Lance, and that's pretty much it this week. Dave has been wandering around into the forest, as he sometimes does, once a year in order to seek out children's blood. He then transfuses the blood into his own bloodstream, and that's how we stay so youthful and vibrant. So this is a regular occurrence. It's going to happen at least once a year. It's basically the Mr. Burns school of youthful rejuvenation. So, we wish him the best. Thanks to this process, we have no idea how old Dave actually is. I mean, he could be a 1,000-year-old warlock. He could have been born yesterday. I have no idea. But this week I'm here, and guess what, ladies and gentlemen? I am not going to berate you with my own voice for the next hour. That's torturous. I wouldn't want anyone to have to endure that. We actually have a very special episode of The Serfs. This week we have a special guest, Brian Cunningham. He is running for the Democratic position of City Council in District 40 of Brooklyn. He entertained us to no end. He gave us half an hour of his time, and we talk about all kinds of things. We talk about, headless horse corpses and other interesting things, the real questions. We asked the real questions. We got the real answers, just like you guys want to hear. So we are going to be playing that just now. Obviously, there's a huge amount of news that we have to get to, but we'll have to wait until next week. We're sentient and aware of the fact that Sebastian Gorka needs a funeral, the fact that Donald Trump has turned the disaster in Houston into a fiasco about himself, as he does with all things, the fact that North Korea likes to launch missiles over Japan now, just past Hokkaido to the eastern side of Japan. All terrible, all crazy. We're going to address all of it next week. We're just going to have to compound fracture all this news. But before we get to that, we have to have a little bit of bookkeeping. Today's episode is brought to you by the letter L for local politics. And the reason I say that, ladies and gentlemen, is that on September 12th, you are voting, if you live in New York and you're a New York listener to the show, you are voting on your local city councilors. And I know it doesn't seem this way, but local politics affect your life so much more than federal level politics. I mean, yes, the overall federal power is way more encompassing than the city council, but for your day-to-day life, say like your ability to urinate on the streets or your ability to drink the urine that you find on the streets, that will be legislated at the local level. So it is very important that you vote for local politics. I know it's boring. I know there's not all the scandals. I know Anthony Weiner doesn't show his penis, but at the same time, it's very important. So get out September 12th if you live in New York, and please go vote. And the second order of business is the most important part of every week. What am I drinking this evening? I'm drinking nothing, because there's nothing sadder than a man drinking alcohol by himself and talking to no one. I think that would be pretty much the definition of an alcoholic. So stay tuned for next week when me and Dave will open up some good old brewskis. But in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, here is the Serfs exclusive interview with Brian Cunningham. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here with Brian Cunningham. He is a Democrat running for City Council in District 40, the Fighting 40 in Brooklyn. Brian, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Can you explain to the layman, because a lot of our listeners, some of them are in the UK, some are in Australia, some are in Canada. And when I say layman, think of like Lenny from Of Mice and Men, all right? So what exactly a city councilor does?
Sure. A city council member in Brooklyn is responsible for a couple of things. One is passing a budget. Two is passing legislation, which is laws. So you actually introduce bills that the mayor may or may not sign. But it's a very influential role. There are 48 Democrats out of 51 seats. So we can't complain about being like DC Democrats and doing nothing.
In that level of government, is there at all like corruption? Is there a lot of corruption in city councilors kind of stuff?
You know, the city has a really tough time doing corruption, particularly New York City, because there's so much rules. We have campaign finance boards that looks over our ethical spending on our campaigns, but also you have to walk around the streets and somebody might stop you in the street and say, hey, you're the corrupt guy, right? So I think there's some social pressure not to be corrupt in the city council. You actually go home to your constituents every night.
So obviously, besides your rugged good looks, what separates you from the other candidates?
Besides my exceptional beard and phenomenal looks that my wife thinks I'm pretty cute. I think what separates me is my experience. I don't know if you had a chance to look at my resume, but I've worked as a chief of staff in City Hall. I've worked as a special assistant in the state legislature, and I've also been worked for President Obama's My Brother's Keepers Alliance, which is an initiative to save boys and men of color throughout the country. And I say country, United States, because I know this is aired in Canada as well. We haven't gotten that far, Canada. Sorry. You guys have healthcare. We're just trying to save our boys and men of color.
No, it's cool. So yeah, I did look at your webpage. I went over it, and obviously this is a left podcast, progressive podcast. I loved a lot of it. You know, some of the terms I was reading, like the gap between the rich and the poor is extending. Starting to get a little like, Bernie Sanders vibe coming out of that, right?
Well, I have a campaign manager and a campaign team that worked on Bernie's campaign, so forgive my language on progressive politics.
Obviously, the term socialist is a bit of a taboo in the United States. We don't use, during the Bernie campaign, there's a lot of stuff like you don't say the S word, right? Like it seems to be a bad word in the United States. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think the big taboo should be conservatism, right? When you look at what's going on in terms of what their policies are. Their policies for 8 years was anything that the president said yes to, they said no. Yeah. So we knew the sky was blue, but they said no. Yeah. We said that people needed health care, they said no. So I think the progressive movement is a strong movement that's actually fighting back against this far extreme right movement that's corrupted our politics and actually has erased a lot of social safety nets that they actually benefit from. Yeah. It's kind of ironic.
So speaking of social safety nets, obviously I walked over here on a road. I stopped at, I walked, but I'm just saying I walked on a road.
Impressive.
And I walked on the road. I stopped at a light. I wasn't hit by a car. Like there is obviously social infrastructure in the United States already. Why does it stop, say, at healthcare?
So it's funny that you say that because everybody talks about big government. Yeah. I always laugh and say, next time there's a crime, don't call the cops. Next time there's a fire, don't call the fire department. Don't go to a hospital. These are all social safety nets, right? But when you talk about healthcare, people don't realize that that's the primary thing that keeps people alive. Yeah. 3 things happen when you get sick. You either get better, which I hope I get better. I'm having a little congestion. Yeah. You get sicker, or you die. Right, those are 3 options, and the latter 2 I don't want. Yeah. Right, so I think when I talk about creating a Medicare for all package in New York City, I mean it. I mean the fact that we need to do a better job, like other progressive countries. I mean, Canada included, of making sure our people stay healthy. That's how you keep the workforce healthy, right? Yeah. So I don't know why it's so taboo to say stay healthy.
Yeah. Well, if you put it that way, it's a lot better. So obviously at the top of your list when I was looking at your webpage, affordable housing, huge issue. What is the housing crisis in Brooklyn? Because I come from Vancouver and we say there's a housing crisis, but I think the median rent is $1,500 Canadian. Oh, yeah? Yeah, and then over here it's what? That's like amazing. Yeah. What is it here? Is it like $3,000 US is the median rent?
I was talking to someone today who told me that a studio in a building not too far from here, across the street, is $3,000. So a studio, not a bedroom. You don't have a bedroom. You get a studio. So the rents in this district in particular have gone up 80% in the last 10 years. That is a serious crisis. We have over 60,000 people in New York City that we know of are homeless. This doesn't count people who couch surf. It doesn't count people who live with a friend and don't consider themselves homeless. We have what's called a working poor homeless class. So people put on suits and ties every day and go to Planet Fitness to take a shower to go back to work and sleep in their cars. So we have a serious homeless crisis and a serious housing crisis in New York City.
So how does Brooklyn go about doing that? Because again, I'm using Vancouver as the example we know. In Vancouver, the homeless usually set up these tent cities. So they're just, little areas full of tents, and they stay until basically, the feces accumulates to a point that the cops come in, they move it down, and then, they do it again somewhere else. Is that similar?
In New York, we have a better system. Okay. We actually incarcerate you for being homeless. Right? So that's our housing stock. When you look at it, is one third of our people in prison in Rikers Island are actually people that are poor and committed crimes of poverty. Yeah. The other third is people who are mentally ill. And then guess what? We have 1/3 who actually committed a crime, right? So that's actually an interesting segue in terms of we have people who are literally just, like I said, sleeping in cars, sleeping on benches, sleeping in trains. And when they do that, they get arrested for being poor and then sent to Rikers Island, which has horrible conditions for people. So it's kind of tragic. And we're trying to see what we can do in this city, particularly in our district, to model a good plan that would actually provide more housing for people who live in our city.
So when you say about incarceration, obviously these numbers you're throwing at me, they're disproportionately towards people of color, obviously towards, and But yeah, okay, okay. I was saying earlier we don't really have the term African Canadian in Canada. It's just black. But yeah, so it's obviously disproportionately towards black people, and obviously minor drug offenses is a big issue here.
Yeah, low levels of marijuana. So it's actually funny now that you watch that they've created industries where you can actually legally sell marijuana now in certain parts of the country and open a dispensary. But some of the best drug dealers from the 1980s can't participate in that economy. That's weird, right? So we have to actually fix some of the broken windows policing and some of the broken windows practices, such as urinating on the sidewalk. Bad thing to do. I'm not encouraging anybody to pee on the sidewalk. But when you go to a restaurant and say, hey, can I use your bathroom? They say, no, you got to buy a cup of coffee, but I'm broke. What do I end up doing? I end up pissing on the sidewalk, right? When you open a container of liquor, again, not advocating for drinking in public, but that becomes the kind of thing where they crack down on these crimes so hard, where hardcore criminals are actually doing a lot of bad things, white-collar crime, stealing people's money, and these folks never get prosecuted. So I think we have a sick obsession in this country with incarceration. It started with people being shackled and chained and brought to this country. Then it went to from slavery to Jim Crow and segregation. Then it went to the war on drugs. And now we're dealing with mass incarceration. I mean, and I think it's just a progression of bad policies in this country.
That sounds like a great segue, because I definitely want to talk about race in America right now, especially in this post-Trump dystopian future that we live in. So obviously, one of the things that happened after President Trump that was really upsetting to me is it kind of seemed like it gave all these white nationalists and Nazis, KKK people, the ability to come out of the closet. Like, I think they always, I
love that terminology.
Yeah, it's the best way to put it. But
those are the same people that hate blacks and people of LGBTQ, right? So they finally came out of the closet themselves, which is great.
But like, I think they were always there, right? But this Trump era seems to have emboldened them.
Well, it really actually got emboldened, not to cut you, but it really got emboldened during the Obama administration. Okay. I remember being in D.C. In 2010 and watching the evolution and the beginning of the Tea Party. Yeah. Very strange people dressed in very strange clothing on Capitol Hill, introducing very strange ideas, far right ideas.
I was going to say with very limited understanding of the history.
Yeah. And then got elected to go legislate with their bad ideas. And not how government works. So I thought it was kind of interesting they appeared. But obviously racism in this country has historically plagued this country. I talked in the last question about this progression of racism. Malcolm X used to make a statement that racism is like a Cadillac. Every year comes out a new model. And I think we're seeing Trump's model of racism. But certainly I think racism existed for a very long time. I think there was hope for many when President Obama was elected that we would have a post-racial society. It actually
we solved racism. It's over.
we elected a half black, half white guy, and we're going to solve racism. But certainly we have a deeply rooted problem in this country, and it begins with conversations like this, uncomfortable conversation that we can talk about, and we can laugh about, and actually really address.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you say there's this new Cadillac, as you call it, right?
The orange Cadillac. Yeah, with a blonde top.
I guess you're also referring, of course, to the alt-right. And this new kind of Breitbart-esque Steve Bannon, Gorka.
Is he still on the job, Steve Bannon?
No, Steve Bannon's out.
Okay.
So is Gorka. Gorka's out. So almost all the right nationalists are out of the White House.
And Mooch is gone too, right?
Yeah, Mooch is gone as well.
I'm waiting for Trump to be out.
That's what you guys are working on, right?
I have a checklist in my office. I'm Xing them off one by one.
But so there's this new kind of movement. Do you think that because they've rebranded themselves, now they call themselves the alt-right, and they work a lot on the internet, and there's all this like anti-social justice warriors, do you think that is somehow helping them recruit and it's helping grow their numbers? Because I'd like to think that these guys are still a minority in the United States.
Well, I don't know. I mean, this is what we call in the hood cyberbullying. Yeah. Right? Somebody who gets tough on the internet, a cyber thug. Yeah. All of a sudden, you got a mouth because no one can tell who you are. You change your name. You have this weird picture. Everybody that posts on my social media that always has the most derogatory things to say, always never have a profile picture. And I'm like, show me your face, coward, right? So it's always interesting. I think this movement is not a solid movement. I think there's a vocal few who continue to talk out loud. But again, I believe that some of these conversations are historical conversations that have taken place over the years that people continue to have in silence, that now they feel more comfortable through the net of a social media to articulate, but they wouldn't tell you. There are a lot of races up north. There's a lot of races in New York, but we act like it's just the South that suffers this problem. So it's actually fascinating to watch this play out.
In terms of, the Democratic Party as it stands today, and you're running for the Democratic position of city councilor, a lot of people are using the metaphor that the Democratic Party is kind of like a headless chicken right now because they don't really know what's going on. I like to think of it more like a dead headless corpse of a horse or something because, it's been beaten to death, right? And yet it doesn't have a head and no one knows who's running it anymore. So how exactly can the Democrats get themselves together to start taking back all the branches of government, which they've lost?
I think what the Democratic Party has to start doing is stop operating as this party that says we're not them. Right. I think that's been the biggest problem. The other thing, we have to actually make people feel uncomfortable and actually have a backbone and stand on policies. What the Republican Party's done, and they've done a successful job at is they say no to everything, right? The Democrats say they're proposing, they say no. They are very sure about what they want to accomplish. I think the Democrats are still in need of making sure that, one, we advance and opportunities for people, but also we have to find a few or three policy issues that we're going to be serious about in the next 2 or 3 years. And one of the things that, again, I'm focused on, particularly in the city council, is really creating affordable housing with at-cost development. I'm very serious about that. I'm very serious about municipalities taking back healthcare and actually creating their own healthcare plans. I'm very serious about after-school programs. We have to find three things that, even though we sound like a broken robot, we're going to keep beating that dead horse until they become the dead horse that's headless. What, headless chicken or horse? What do you say? Something headless, dead, right? But we definitely have to find 3 or 4 things that we are seriously committed to over the next few years and stop worrying about re-election. I think that's part of our problem. We get caught up in, what am I running for next? What am I going to do next? People ask me all the time, I haven't even been elected yet, and their question is, what are you running for next? Yeah. Well, I'm running for this in the next 12 days.
So my next question. Well, I just want to stick on this question for just one more second. In terms of, being inspirational, and you're saying the Democrats need a message, are you seeing any politicians on the larger scale that are starting to stand out for you that you think might be able to take the party back?
I definitely like what Cory Booker's echoing in terms of criminal justice reform. There's some issues I have with Cory Booker in terms of taking money from pharmaceutical companies, right? But at the same time, you can't, I guess you can't let great get in the way of good or good get in the way of great. I forget the term. Sound like George Bush right now. What's that saying again? But I think that Cory Booker is a star in this party, certainly. I think Elizabeth Warren has been a star in this party in terms of talking about corporatization and corporate welfare that people don't talk about all the time. And I think Bernie Sanders, I'm not sure what party he's anymore. He's a Democrat, he's a socialist, he's an independent, but certainly a voice in terms of talking about college tuition and lowering the college tuition and actually create a Medicare for all. We need to continue to have bright people like this elevate these ideas. And again, it's weird that I say the latter two, because these are older people who are actually still talking about running for president in 2020. But certainly their ideas to be championed better, I think.
No, that's great. Obviously, the Bernie Sanders movement really inspired a lot of the younger generation, and all of a sudden they're coming out, and now these are kids who are growing up.
Isn't that ironic? Their grandparents' generation inspired. I guess.
But part of that inspiration and all that kind of stuff, I think these kids now, they're growing up in, especially if you're centered to the left, right? You're growing up in an environment where it just seems as if there's this dark cloud over politics, and the conservatives control everything. What would you say to young grassroots kids who are trying to get involved, and what can they do to kind of step up?
So some people say run for office. I don't say run for office. I say find a cause. Yep. I think that's more important than just running for office. Again, one of the things why I got into politics was working with young people. Before I started all this flashy stuff on my resume about being special assistant and chief of staff and all this other stuff, I actually worked in high school with young people who were underage, overcredited, and that was the thing that inspired me to want to do something in my community. And from that, it just was a progression. So I would say find something that you're passionate about, pursue it, and create a plan. That I think that's the most simple thing. You're passionate about cycling, well, do that, right? If you're passionate about news and media journalism being corrupt, start a podcast. Do something in your community to actually make a difference.
I think that was our first endorsement, folks.
It was. Are you guys endorsing back?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
No, I'll forget it.
So, one quick question. How is multiculturalism in Brooklyn? Like, obviously, you get here, there's the stereotype that Brooklyn's majority black, but then I go up north, and it seems like hipsters have just destroyed the northern part of Brooklyn with PBR and all that kind of stuff. Is this an area that's diversifying, and is it better for it?
So this district is still 89% black. Right, which is funny because you see a lot of people that are white. I think it stands out because you notice it now because they weren't here a few years ago, right? But I think there's certainly a narrative that this community is all of a sudden becoming whitewashed. And I think part of what we know about this community, what I know from growing up here my entire life, is that this community has always been diverse. When you talk about Flatbush and East Flatbush, you're talking about Caribbean Brooklyn. When you talk about Ditmas Park, you're talking about folks who've had resources for a very long time. A lot of former Dutch and Jews that live in Ditmas Park. We have Midwood in our district, which is also a largely Jewish community. We have PLG, Prospect Lefferts Gardens. It's always been a diverse community. So this district has always been diverse. What's happening now, though, is they're beginning to push out some of the Caribbean Brooklyn. And they're not doing it in a tasteful way. A lot of this has happened because of the high levels of evictions, high levels of foreclosures, and high levels of rent that people can no longer pay. So I think that's a problem. The problem wasn't diversity or mix. We love diversity. We love the fact that you can come to Jamaica, this is like little Jamaica, but you can come to Flatbush and get some Caribbean food. You can go to Bed-Stuy and get some down south food, and then go to Bay Ridge and get some Italian food. That's what made Brooklyn great. But what's tearing away at the fabric is now Brooklyn's just becoming monolithic, right? Both in culture, in brands. Everywhere you get a mocha latte or a chai tea, but there's no beef patty, right? So I think that's what made people come to Brooklyn in the first place. We got to keep that.
Okay. A couple weeks ago, I saw a New York comedian named Pat Brown, and she had a great line where it's like, the thing with gentrification, white people, sometimes they bring strawberries, sometimes they bring smallpox. So do you think that there is a gentrification occurring in Brooklyn on top of what you just said?
Yeah, no, it certainly is. I would be blind, or I don't know if that's the correct term, but I would be overlooking the fact that there is a mass movement of people out of this community, people moving in. The problem is that we're not having this honest conversation about gentrification, what it means. For folks of color, black people, they're being pushed out because landlords no longer want them here. And what's happening to white people is they're being overpriced for bad service, right? So you're paying $3,000 for the same apartment that somebody's paying $1,000 for, and your plumbing still doesn't work. You still have insects running through your apartment. You still have all these repairs that haven't been done, but they put some new sheetrock on and go, here's your new apartment for $3,000 a month. So both are being bamboozled. We're just not coming together and saying enough is enough.
Just for the time we have left, I want to focus, I guess, on your platform, because we've been talking about all kinds. Yeah. Yeah, here's some softballs for you. So you said one of the big things about you is that you want to support small businesses. Tell me a little bit about small businesses in Brooklyn.
Sure. So right now in Brooklyn, if you go on major corridors, on Nostrand Avenue, Flatbush Avenue, we have a vacancy rate of 19% and up, where small businesses just don't exist there anymore, right? So that's a major, major problem. And one of my opponents actually cheers the Merchants Group that has a 26% vacancy rate and saying that she's the most qualified to run for this office. I find that ironic. So one thing we have to do is, one, we have to address the high commercial tenant rents for commercial tenants. A lot of commercial tenants have paid $1,000 for years. Now they're at $5,000, $10,000 for their commercial space. On top of that, they have to make payroll. And now minimum wage has gone up, which I agree with raising the minimum wage because people are working harder.
What would you raise it to?
I think we should do a living wage. I think as the cost of living rises, we should also see wages increase and go up. I think that would help balance out the economy. The other piece is healthcare. Healthcare is a big driver that pulls down a lot of small businesses. So for me, it's one, giving tax breaks to small businesses who hire 4 more full-time employees. It's making sure we get our Medicare for All NYC package passed so that we can actually lower the cost of health.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I think our foreign listeners won't understand how healthcare works in New York specifically.
In New York, you don't get healthcare.
Well, that's easy.
No, New York the United States in general does not provide universal health care. So we do not have a system that works for people.
But then Obamacare changed it.
Obamacare, call Obamacare. We like that because Trump is providing something else. Trump don't care. Right? Let's do that. But I think Obamacare definitely helped to reduce some of the cost of healthcare, or provide healthcare for everybody. But what happened was a lot of states, Republican states, said, we don't want the help. So it actually provided only one insurance company was able to drive the price up because there's no competition in the market. So what we need to see was more competition in the market to actually drive those costs down. But currently, right now, some of the things that Obamacare has done is insured 20 million more Americans. And it also allowed college students and young people to stay in their parents' health insurance. I aged out at 32, so I can't do it. But stay in their health insurance plan until 26 years old. Those were major accomplishments. It was steps in the right direction. We're not finished yet. We have so much more work to do.
And I guess one last question about your platform. This is one that I know people are salivating about. You talk about cultural preservation and celebrating food.
I definitely should have brought my wife in for this part. So my wife is actually a cultural heritage. She's a museum professional. So for Stephanie, art is everything. We have this writing in our house that says everything is art, everything is politics, and that's because I'm political and she's an artist. But I think it's really a testament to the fact that as Brooklyn is changing, because gentrification, things always change. We call it gentrification now, but a few years ago it was white people leaving New York City because they want to live with the black people, right? And I think as those cultures change, there has to be a way to preserve the culture of the people that were here that made this community great. So one of the things we're proposing is actually create a cultural institution in this community that would focus on the contributions of West Indian people to Flatbush, Brooklyn over the last 30 or 40 years through their immigrant experience. The Dutch have a Dutch Reformed Church not too far, and that's how I know there was Dutch people in this community, because of the Dutch Reformed Church. But we have nothing to document what people of color, what black people, specifically what Caribbean people have added to this neighborhood, and that's problematic.
So one of the final questions, do you guys have negative attack ads in part of your policy, or do you guys do radio attack ads? You know, those kind with the deep voice, like, what's your opponent say?
Matthew Eugene has been in office for 10 years and has done nothing. No, we really have not gone after our incumbent outside, the incumbent or any of the challengers. I think what we have done consistently is talk directly to voters about what's important in this election. We talk about the fact that, if I say over the last 10 years your rent has gone up 80%, and I wasn't a councilman in the last 10 years, I think you kind of can draw a conclusion of who I'm talking about. But in terms of direct, dirty ads, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think by making you look low, I make myself look good. I think I look good all the time, right? But I really believe that if we focus on issues and we talk about things that are important to voters, that will begin to resonate. Our campaign slogan, when I'm walking down the street and people scream, "It's our time," it makes my heart jump with joy. When people say, "I'm going to the polls and I'm voting for you because you stood out to me in that debate," that means the world to me. So we're just focused on issues right now. I don't have a lot of money, so I can't run all these dirty ads. I got to conserve my money, just talk about things I want to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess just to finalize, do you have a message you want to say? Is it, the free marijuana for everyone?
I would talk about free marijuana, but I don't want to get in trouble. I'm not sure. That's legal in Canada, isn't it?
It's going to be in July.
Oh, my God. Yeah. If this race don't work out, I might come to Canada for my health insurance. No, but the one thing I do want to say to New York listeners, people in New York City, September 12th is a Democratic primary. There will be 4 Democrats on the ballot. My name will be there, Brian Cunningham. I hope that you would consider voting for me because of our big, bold, progressive ideas. And these ideas aren't that big and bold and progressive. They're just common sense. Yeah. But definitely we're looking for folks who are going to get involved in this campaign. Our campaign headquarters is at 495 Flatbush Avenue. If you live in Brooklyn, if you live in New York City, if you live in New Jersey, the tri-state area, come out and help us knock some doors, talk to voters, because what happens in this election matters and can have global impact. But also, last thing I'll say is I want you to join my mailing list. So I encourage you to text the phone number 22828, and you should text the word BC for NYC so you can get more information about the campaign.
Awesome, Brian. Thank you so much for your time, man. That was awesome. Yeah. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much to Brian Cunningham and his awesome team for letting us inside the war room to do that interview. Again, if you are a New York listener, please remember to vote on September 12th for whoever it may be. And in the meantime, if you want to write to the Serfs, be sure to go to theserfs.podbean.com and you can just message us in the comment section. It's under each episode. Hate mail, love mail, whatever you want. We actually do have some letters I want to read off, but I'll save it for when we are together again, me and Dave, when he's full of his youth's blood. So for the Serfs, I'm Lance, and you pretty much know the rest.